Before we get into the story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. The reservation book at Lumiere sat open on the mahogany hostess stand. Every slot for Friday evening filled except one. 7:30. Table 12. Reserved under the name Harrison. Kayla Wood knew that name. Knew it the way every server in Manhattan's most exclusive French restaurant knew the names that mattered. James Harrison. Billionaire tech mogul. Venture capitalist. The man who'd turned a college dorm room app into a multi-billion-dollar empire before his 30th birthday. He dined at Lumiere once a month, always alone, always at table 12 by the window overlooking the glittering cityscape. He tipped exactly 20%, never more, never less. He ordered the same meal, filet mignon, medium rare, with the bordelaise sauce. No appetizer, no dessert. One glass of Chateau Margaux. He'd finish his meal in exactly 45 minutes, sign the check, and disappear into a black town car that waited at the curb. Kayla had served him exactly twice in her 8 months at Lumiere. Both times, he'd barely looked at her. Both times, she'd received her 20% tip and felt vaguely dismissed, as if she were a piece of furniture that happened to be mobile. Tonight, Kayla wasn't supposed to be working. She'd requested the evening off 3 weeks ago for her best friend Sophie's birthday dinner. Sophie, who'd stood by her through the disaster of culinary school dropout, through the humiliation of moving back in with her mother at 26, through every failed recipe and burnt soufflé that had convinced Kayla she'd never make it as a chef. Sophie, who'd been the one to suggest Kayla take the server job at Lumiere, just to stay connected to the food world, just to pay the bills while Kayla figured out what came next. But Marco, the floor manager, had called it noon with desperation in his voice. Food poisoning had taken out half the evening staff. He needed bodies. He needed Kayla. Double pay, Marco had offered, and you can have your pick of Christmas shifts. Kayla had stared at the dress hanging on her closet door, the emerald green one she'd bought specifically for Sophie's dinner. Then she'd looked at her bank account, at the rent due in 5 days, at the email from her mother suggesting, again, that maybe Kayla should consider going back to school for something more practical. "I'll be there at 4, Kayla had said. Now it was 6:15, and the dinner rush was building. Kayla tied her black apron over her white button-down and smoothed her dark hair back into the regulation low bun. In the mirror by the staff entrance, her reflection looked tired. 26, with nothing to show for it, except student loan debt and the fading dream of her own restaurant someday. She'd wanted to call it Woods, simple and elegant, a place where food wasn't pretentious, but was elevated, where people came not because they wanted to be seen, but because they wanted to taste something that made them remember why eating could be more than fuel. "Kayla, Section 3 tonight, tables 10 through 15. Marco appeared at her elbow, iPad in hand, stress radiating from every pore. "Harrison's coming in at 7:30 for table 12. You've served him before, right?" "Twice," Kayla confirmed. "Good. Don't screw it up. He's—" Marco paused, choosing his words carefully. "Important." Kayla wanted to point out that every guest at Lumiere was supposed to be important, but she bit her tongue. She needed this job. She needed the money. She needed to stop disappointing everyone, including herself. The evening began smoothly enough. Kayla fell into the familiar rhythm of the dining room. Greet guests with practiced warmth, recite specials with enthusiasm she didn't quite feel. Time courses to perfection. Anticipate needs before they were spoken. Table 10 was celebrating an anniversary. Married 40 years. Still holding hands across the tablecloth. Table 11 was a business dinner. 3 men in expensive suits who barely tasted their food. Table 13 was a first date, awkward and sweet, the woman laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Table 15 was empty, waiting. At 7:25, Kayla checked table 12. Fresh linens, polished silverware, a single red rose in a crystal vase. The rose was new, she noticed. Harrison had never had a flower at his table before. He requested it, Marco said, appearing beside her again. Called ahead. Said he wanted the table to look perfect tonight. Something in Kayla's stomach tightened. James Harrison didn't make special requests. He was a creature of rigid habit, of controlled routine. Is he bringing someone? No. Still a table for one. Marco frowned at his iPad. But he also bought out table 15, paid full price for a 4-top, said he wanted the space next to him to remain empty. That was strange. Lumiere was booked solid on Friday nights, a 6-month wait list for reservations. Buying out an entire table just to keep it empty was the kind of eccentric, wealthy behavior that should have made Kayla roll her eyes. Except something about it felt off. Not eccentric. Sad. At 7:30 exactly, the front door opened. James Harrison stepped into Lumiere, and Kayla's breath caught. She'd seen him twice before, but both times she'd been focused on her job, on not spilling wine or forgetting the specials. Now, waiting by the service station with a water pitcher, she actually looked at him. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that was slightly too long to be corporate, curling at his collar. He wore a charcoal suit that had definitely been tailored, probably in Milan, and a white shirt open at the collar. No tie. His face was all sharp angles, strong jaw, high cheekbones, but it was his eyes that caught Kayla. Gray-blue, like a winter ocean, and profoundly tired. This was a man who didn't sleep enough, who carried weight invisible to everyone around him. The hostess led him to table 12. He nodded his thanks, didn't smile, and sat with his back to the window, so he faced the dining room. That was also new. Usually he sat facing the view. Kayla gave him 2 minutes to settle, then approached with her server smile firmly in place. Good evening, Mr. Harrison. Welcome back to Lumiere. Those gray-blue eyes lifted to hers, and for the first time in their 3 encounters, James Harrison actually looked at her. Really looked. Kayla felt the scrutiny like a physical touch, as if he were cataloging every detail. Her face, her posture, the way her hand gripped the water pitcher. Kayla, he said, and his voice was deeper than she remembered. You remembered my name. Of course. She poured water into his glass with practiced steadiness. Can I start you with your usual Chateau Margaux? No. He set down the menu without opening it. Actually, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Kayla's professional smile faltered. This wasn't how these interactions went. Guests didn't ask servers for honesty. They asked for wine recommendations, or gluten-free options, or whether the chef could accommodate some complicated dietary restriction. Of course, Mr. Harrison. What can I help you with? He leaned back in his chair, and Kayla saw tension in every line of his body. How much would it cost to buy out this entire restaurant for the evening? Kayla blinked. I'm sorry? The restaurant. All of it. Every table. How much would I need to pay to have Lumiere completely to myself for, say, 3 hours? Heat crept up Kayla's neck. This was the kind of question that should go to management, not to a server who made $17 an hour, plus tips. Mr. Harrison, I think you'd need to speak with our general manager about private event bookings. I don't want a private event. I want to eat dinner alone, completely alone, without. He paused, jaw tightening. without people staring at me, without whispers, without feeling like every bite I take is being photographed for someone's social media. His eyes met hers again. I'm willing to pay whatever it costs. I just want one evening where I can eat a meal in peace. There was something raw in his voice, something that cracked through the billionaire veneer and revealed actual human exhaustion underneath. Kayla found herself responding before she thought better of it. I can ask Marco, our floor manager. But, Mr. Harrison, reservations were made months ago. The people here tonight have been looking forward to this. I'll compensate them. Full refund of their reservation fee, plus. He pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. Plus $500 per person for the inconvenience. That should cover a very nice dinner somewhere else. Kayla did the math in her head. Lumiere sat 70 guests at capacity. At $500 per person, that was $35,000 just in inconvenience fees, not counting whatever premium he'd pay to the restaurant itself. The number was obscene. Let me get Marco, Kayla said quietly. She found the floor manager in the kitchen, arguing with Chef Laurent about Table 6's complaint that their duck was too rare. Kayla pulled him aside. James Harrison wants to buy out the entire restaurant. Tonight. Right now. Marco's eyes went wide. What? He wants everyone out. Says he'll pay full compensation to all the guests, plus $500 per person. He wants to eat alone. For a long moment, Marco just stared at her. Then he straightened his tie and headed for the dining room. Stall him. I need to call Philippe. Philippe Marchand was the owner, a third-generation restaurateur who'd inherited Lumiere from his father and ran it with iron-fisted elegance. Kayla had met him exactly once, during her hiring interview, and he'd terrified her with his sharp questions and sharper gaze. The idea of Philippe Marchand making this decision in real time made her stomach clench. Kayla returned to table 12. James Harrison was staring at his phone, but Kayla suspected he wasn't actually reading whatever was on the screen. Marco is consulting with the owner, she said. It may take a few minutes. Thank you. He set down his phone. You think I'm insane? It wasn't a question, but Kayla answered anyway. I think you're having a difficult evening, Mr. Harrison. Something flickered in those tired eyes. You're very diplomatic. I'm a server at a 5-star restaurant. Diplomacy is in the job description. Kayla surprised herself with the dry humor in her voice. She never joked with guests, especially not wealthy ones who could complain and cost her the job. But James Harrison smiled, just a small curve of his mouth, there and gone in a heartbeat, but it transformed his entire face. For a moment, he didn't look like an exhausted billionaire. He looked like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to find something funny. Fair point, he said. Then his phone buzzed, and the smile vanished. He glanced at the screen, and his jaw tightened. Excuse me. He stood abruptly and walked toward the restaurant entrance, phone pressed to his ear. Kayla watched him go, his shoulders rigid with tension. Through the glass doors, she could see him pacing on the sidewalk, one hand gesturing sharply as he spoke to whoever was on the other end of the call. Marco reappeared at her elbow. Philippe said yes. $25,000 to the restaurant. Plus, Harrison covers all the guest compensations. We're shutting down service. Kayla's stomach dropped. You're actually doing this? Kayla, do you know how much press this restaurant could get if James Harrison becomes a regular who books private evenings? Do you know how many billionaires will want the same experience? Marco's eyes gleamed. This is a gold mine. What about the guests who are already here? We're informing them now. Full refund, $500 per person, and a guaranteed reservation for any future date they choose. Most of them are thrilled. It's a story they'll tell for years. Marco checked his watch. Start clearing your other tables. Once everyone's out, you'll serve Harrison, alone. What? Kayla's voice pitched higher than she intended. Marco, I'm not a private event coordinator. I'm a line server. Get someone more senior. He asked for you specifically. Said you were kind. Marco's expression softened slightly. Look, I know this is weird, but it's triple pay for the evening, and he's already adding an automatic 25% gratuity to whatever the bill is. You'll make more tonight than you'd make in a week. Just serve him dinner, be professional, and let the man eat in peace. Kayla wanted to argue, wanted to point out that this entire situation was bizarre, bordering on unhinged. But she thought about her rent, about the email from her mother, about the fact that Sophie's birthday dinner was supposed to start in 30 minutes, and Kayla was going to have to text and cancel. Again. The third time this year, she'd missed something important because of work. Fine, Kayla said. But if he's secretly a serial killer, I'm haunting you. Marco snorted. Deal. The next 45 minutes were surreal. Kayla watched as the dining room slowly emptied, guests leaving with confused expressions and envelopes containing checks. The anniversary couple from table 10 looked disappointed until Kayla explained about the $500 compensation. Then they laughed and said they'd take their grandkids to Disney World with the windfall. The business dinner left without a word, barely glancing up from their phones. The awkward first date seemed relieved, as if the interruption saved them from having to admit the chemistry wasn't there. By 8:30, Lumiere was empty, except for essential kitchen staff, and Kayla. The dining room felt cavernous, all those empty tables with their perfect place settings waiting for guests who wouldn't arrive. The lighting seemed dimmer somehow, more intimate. Outside the windows, the city glittered and pulsed with Friday night energy, oblivious to the strangeness happening 40 stories above. James Harrison sat at table 12, still staring at his phone, tension radiating from every line of his body. Kayla approached slowly. Mr. Harrison, we're ready for you now. He looked up, and Kayla saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe, or relief. Everyone's gone? Everyone except kitchen staff and me. You have the entire restaurant to yourself. He stood, glancing around the empty dining room, and for a moment, Kayla saw vulnerability in his expression. Then the mask came down again, smooth and controlled. Thank you. I know this was disruptive. It's certainly the most unusual request I've had in my serving career, Kayla admitted. Can I bring you your usual Chateau Margaux now? Actually, no. I'd like a whiskey. Neat. Your best single malt. He moved back to his chair, but didn't sit. And Kayla, would you mind if I asked you to do something unconventional? Every alarm bell in Kayla's head started ringing. This was how nightmare customer stories began. The empty restaurant, the unusual request, the wealthy man who thought his money bought him anything he wanted. What kind of unconventional? James Harrison had the grace to look embarrassed. Would you sit with me? Just for a few minutes. I promise I'm not. This isn't some creepy proposition. He broke off, running a hand through his hair. I bought out an entire restaurant so I could eat alone. And now that everyone's gone, I realize I don't actually want to be alone. But I also can't stand the idea of calling someone, of having to perform the version of myself everyone expects. You don't know me. You have no expectations. Would you just sit with me for a moment? Kayla should have said no. Should have recited some policy about fraternizing with guests. Should have made an excuse and fled to the kitchen. But something in James Harrison's voice stopped her. That thread of genuine loneliness woven through the request. How long had it been since someone asked Kayla to just sit with them? Not as a server, not as a potential business connection, not as anything except a human being sharing space with another human being. "I'll get your whiskey first," Kayla said finally, "and then we can talk for a few minutes. But Mr. Harrison, I need you to understand that I'm here because it's my job. If at any point this becomes uncomfortable, I'm leaving." "Understood. And please call me James. Mr. Harrison makes me feel like my father." He almost smiled again, and I've been trying very hard not to turn into him. Kayla headed to the bar, her mind spinning. This was either the beginning of the most bizarre shift of her life or the most interesting conversation she'd had in months, possibly both. She poured 2 fingers of Macallan 25 into a crystal tumbler, the amber liquid catching the light. On impulse, she poured a second, smaller measure for herself. If James Harrison wanted unconventional, Kayla would give him unconventional. When she returned to table 12, she set down his whiskey and slid into the chair across from him, her own glass in hand. James raised an eyebrow. "I thought you were working." "I am working, but you bought out the entire restaurant, which means technically there are no other guests to serve, which means I have time for a drink." Kayla lifted her glass. "To unconventional evenings." James's lips twitched. "To unconventional evenings." He clinked his glass against hers, and they both drank. The whiskey burned smooth and warm, expensive in a way Kayla's usual bottom-shelf bourbon never managed. "Tell me something, Kayla. What do you actually think of me?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm sorry? You've served me 3 times now. You're observant. I can tell by the way you anticipate orders, by how you read the table. You've formed an opinion. I want to know what it is." James leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Be honest. You won't get in trouble, I promise." Kayla studied him over the rim of her glass. This was dangerous territory, the kind of honesty that could backfire spectacularly. But something in James's expression made her decide to take the risk. "I think you're exhausted. I think you're lonely. And I think you've built a life where you're surrounded by people but completely isolated, and you have no idea how to fix it." Silence stretched between them. James didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at Kayla with an intensity that made her want to squirm. Then, slowly, he exhaled. "Damn, that's more accurate than it should be." "I'm sorry," Kayla said quickly. "That was too personal. I shouldn't have—" "No, you're right." James took another sip of whiskey. "I have a board meeting tomorrow morning. We're announcing a merger that will make or break the company's next 5 years. I've spent the last 3 months negotiating, strategizing, barely sleeping. And tonight, I realized that if the deal fails, if the company crumbles, I don't have a single person I could call just to talk about it. Not a friend, not family. Nobody who cares about James the person instead of James Harrison the CEO." He laughed, but it sounded hollow. "So I bought out a restaurant because at least here I can pretend I chose to be alone." Kayla felt something crack in her chest. "That's awful." "It's what I signed up for." James swirled the whiskey in his glass. "Success has a price. I knew that going in." "Success doesn't require loneliness," Kayla countered. "Those are separate things that you've convinced yourself are connected." James looked at her sharply. "And you're an expert on success?" The words stung, probably because they hit close to a truth Kayla didn't like examining. "No, I'm an expert on failure, actually, which means I know a lot about what doesn't work." She finished her whiskey in one swallow. "I dropped out of culinary school because I had a panic attack during final exams. Spent a year trying to convince myself I could still be a chef without the degree. Couldn't get hired anywhere, except chain restaurants, and I burned out in 3 months. Now I'm serving food I didn't cook in a restaurant I'll never be able to afford to eat at as a guest, living with my mother at 26, and watching everyone I went to school with actually make something of themselves. So no, I'm not an expert on success, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that success without connections, without people who care about you, is just another kind of failure. She stood abruptly, her face burning. I'll put in your usual order. Filet mignon, medium rare, bordelaise sauce. Kayla fled to the kitchen before James could respond. Her hands shook as she entered the order into the system. What was wrong with her? You didn't trauma dump on guests, especially not billionaire guests who could destroy your career with one bad review. She'd just admitted to dropping out of school, to living with her mother, to being a complete mess. And for what? Because James Harrison looked lonely and Kayla recognized the feeling? Everything okay out there? Chef Laurent appeared at her elbow, his weathered face creased with concern. Fine. He ordered his usual. Kayla avoided the chef's eyes. Kayla. Laurent waited until she looked at him. I've worked in restaurants for 35 years. I know what it looks like when someone's having a moment. Whatever happened out there, breathe. You're doing fine. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Kayla blinked back unexpected tears. Thanks, chef. She busied herself with prep work while the order cooked, arranging garnishes with unnecessary precision, polishing already clean silverware. Anything to avoid going back to table 12. But eventually, the expo bell rang, and Laurent himself plated the filet mignon with the care usually reserved for VIP guests. Go. He paid for the experience. Give it to him. Kayla carried the plate to table 12, her server mask firmly back in place. James hadn't moved, his empty whiskey glass the only sign he'd done anything in her absence. She set down the plate with practiced elegance. Your filet mignon, cooked medium rare. Can I get you anything else? Sit down. James's voice was quiet but firm. Please. Mr. Harrison. James. And please, sit. I'm not going to eat while you hover. It makes me feel like even more of an asshole than I already am. Reluctantly, Kayla sat. James picked up his knife and fork, cut a piece of the steak, and chewed slowly. He'd done this same ritual twice before, but Kayla had never paid attention to the way he ate, methodically, almost mechanically, as if food were fuel rather than pleasure. It made her sad in a way she couldn't quite articulate. You're not a failure, James said after swallowing. You're 26. I didn't start my company until I was 24, and it almost bankrupted me 3 times in the first year. The only difference between you and me is luck and timing, and maybe a healthy dose of sociopathic determination. That's a nice thing to say, Kayla replied. But you don't have to make me feel better. I'm the server. That's my job. What if I don't want you to be the server right now? James set down his fork. What if I want you to be the person who just told me an uncomfortable truth and made me realize I've been lying to myself for years? Kayla's breath caught. I don't understand. I've spent the last 5 years building an empire. I've sacrificed everything. Relationships, hobbies, sleep, my own mental health, because I thought success would make me happy, would make me matter. And tonight, sitting in my office at 6 p.m., looking at my empty calendar for the weekend, I realized that I've succeeded at everything except building a life worth living. So I came here, to the one place where I felt like I could be anonymous, and I made the insane decision to buy out the entire restaurant because I thought being alone would make me feel less lonely. Does that make any sense? Unfortunately, yes, Kayla admitted. I do the same thing. Work extra shifts to avoid going home, because at least here I have a purpose. At least here, people need me, even if it's just to bring them overpriced wine. James smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. We're a pair, aren't we? Two people running from different versions of the same problem. What problem is that? Figuring out who we are when nobody's watching, when there's no performance, no expectations, no role to play. James pushed his plate aside, the steak only half eaten. Can I tell you something I've never said out loud? Kayla nodded, not trusting her voice. I don't actually like what I do. The company, the deals, the strategy. It's all a game I'm good at, but I don't enjoy it. I wanted to be a teacher. High school history. I loved research, loved the idea of making the past come alive for kids who thought history was boring. But my father said teaching was a waste of my potential, that I had a gift for business and an obligation to use it. So I did, and I won, and I'm miserable. He laughed, but it sounded broken. Pathetic, right? Poor billionaire with his first world problems. It's not pathetic, Kayla said quietly. It's human. Money doesn't make you immune to regret. What would you do? James asked suddenly. If you could do anything, if money and qualifications and everyone's expectations didn't matter, what would Kayla Wood do? The question hit her like a punch. When was the last time someone had asked her that? When was the last time she'd even asked herself? I'd open a restaurant, Kayla heard herself say. Nothing fancy. A neighborhood place where people could come after work and order something that tasted like home, but better. Comfort food elevated. I'd call it Woods. Woods, James repeated. Simple, elegant. Why haven't you done it? Because I dropped out of culinary school. Because I don't have the capital. Because I'm terrified of failing again. Kayla's voice cracked. Because it's easier to serve other people's food than to risk cooking my own. James was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. What if I invested in you? Kayla's brain stuttered to a halt. What? I'm a venture capitalist. It's literally my job to find talented people with good ideas and give them the resources to succeed. You have a vision. You have experience. You understand food and service. Why shouldn't I invest? Because you don't know me, Kayla managed. Because we met 3 hours ago. Because this is insane. I bought out an entire restaurant so I could eat alone, James pointed out. Insane is kind of my theme tonight. Hear me out. You develop a proper business plan, location analysis, menu concepts, financial projections. I'll have my team review it. If it's solid, I'll fund your startup costs. In exchange, I get 15% equity and a seat on your advisory board. Kayla's heart hammered. This wasn't real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. James, you don't make business decisions based on one conversation with a server who had a breakdown in front of you. You're right, I don't. James's expression turned serious. But I do make investments based on potential. And Kayla, you have something that most of the entrepreneurs I meet don't have. You care. You care about food, about people, about creating something meaningful. That's rare. That's valuable. He stood, pulling out his wallet. I'm serious about this, but I'm not going to push. Here's my card. If you decide you want to take the risk, call me. We'll set up a meeting. He laid a black business card on the table, along with a stack of $100 bills that had to be at least $2,000. Kayla stared at the money. James, the bill was already paid, with gratuity. That's not for the restaurant. That's for you. For being honest with me. For reminding me that success without humanity is just expensive loneliness. James shrugged into his coat. Thank you for tonight, Kayla. You gave me something I didn't know I needed. He walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the empty restaurant. Kayla sat frozen at table 12, his business card and the pile of cash in front of her, feeling like objects from another dimension. At the door, James paused and looked back. For what it's worth, I think Woods would be a huge success. People are starving for authenticity. You just have to be brave enough to serve it." Then he was gone, the glass doors closing behind him, and Kayla was alone in the empty restaurant with a business card and a completely derailed life plan and the strangest, most unexpected hope blooming in her chest. Kayla didn't call James Harrison. Not that night, not the next day, not for the entire week that followed. She carried his business card in her wallet, the heavy cardstock feeling like it weighed 10 pounds every time she pulled out cash for coffee or subway fare. She counted the money he'd left 3 times to confirm it was real. $2,000, more than she made in a month of serving shifts. She deposited it in her savings account and watched the balance tick up to something almost respectable, something that could be the beginning of a real emergency fund, or the seed money for something bigger. Sophie called the morning after the bizarre evening at Lumiere, her voice sharp with worry. "Kayla, what happened? You missed my birthday dinner. Again. You said you'd be there." Guilt crashed over Kayla in waves. She'd texted Sophie at 7:45 the night before with a rushed apology. "Emergency at work, can't make it, I'm so sorry." She'd promised herself she'd call the next morning to explain properly. But what could she say? A billionaire bought out the entire restaurant, and I spent 3 hours drinking whiskey and having an existential crisis with him? It sounded like something Kayla had imagined. "I know, I'm sorry. Something came up at the restaurant." Kayla stared at the business card spread on her kitchen table. James Harrison, founder and CEO, Harrison Ventures. A phone number, an email. Nothing else. The minimalism of it felt very him somehow. "Sophie, can I see you today? I need to talk to someone about something completely insane." They met at their usual coffee shop in Brooklyn, a cramped place with mismatched furniture and truly excellent espresso. Sophie arrived in running gear, her blonde hair pulled into a ponytail, looking annoyingly healthy and put together. She'd always been the stable one, the friend who had her life figured out, who'd gone to law school and landed at a good firm, and recently gotten engaged to a man who worshipped her. Next to Sophie's competence, Kayla always felt like a disaster in progress. "Okay, spill," Sophie said, wrapping her hands around a latte. "What's the insane thing?" Kayla told the whole story, starting with Marco's phone call and ending with James Harrison's investment offer and dramatic exit. Sophie listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through disbelief, shock, and something that might have been excitement. "Let me get this straight," Sophie said when Kayla finished. "A billionaire bought out Lumiere so he could eat alone, had an emotional breakdown with you, and then offered to fund your restaurant? When you put it like that, it sounds even more unbelievable," Kayla muttered. "Kayla, this is incredible. Do you know how many aspiring chefs would kill for this opportunity? He's basically handing you your dream. He's a stranger who made an impulsive decision after a weird evening. This isn't real. Real investors don't work like this." Sophie leaned forward. "Have you looked him up? Have you researched what he actually does?" Kayla shook her head. After James left, she'd been too stunned to do anything except cash out and go home in a daze. The next morning, she'd deliberately avoided Googling him, as if not knowing would make the whole thing less real, easier to dismiss as a fever dream. "Let me fix that." Sophie pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. "Okay, James Harrison, 32, founded App Nexus 6 years ago, sold it for $2.3 billion, now runs Harrison Ventures, which is invested in—" Oh my God, Kayla. He backed that vegan food delivery service that went national, and the Farm-to-Table Collective in Portland, and Bloom, that restaurant app everyone uses. Sophie looked up, eyes wide. He specializes in food industry investments. This is what he does. Kayla's hands went cold. Show me. Sophie turned her phone around. James Harrison's face stared out from a Forbes article titled, "The Venture Capitalist Who Wants to Change How America Eats." He looked older in the photo, more polished, his expression closed and professional. Nothing like the exhausted, vulnerable man who'd sat across from Kayla at table 12. Kayla skimmed the article. James had grown up in Montana, son of a hedge fund manager who'd expected him to join the family business. Instead, he'd studied computer science at Stanford, built an app that connected restaurants with surplus food to homeless shelters, and somehow turned that into a tech empire. After selling AppNexus, he'd pivoted to venture capital with a specific focus, investing in food businesses that prioritized sustainability, community, and innovation over pure profit. "He's for real," Kayla whispered. "He's incredibly for real," Sophie corrected. "And Kayla, he chose you. Out of probably hundreds of pitches he hears, he chose you. He doesn't even have a pitch. He has a half-baked idea from a server who trauma dumped on him. Then make a pitch." Sophie grabbed Kayla's hands across the table. "You've been talking about opening your own place since we were teenagers. You have notebooks full of menu ideas. You know the industry. The only thing stopping you is fear. Don't let fear win." Kayla wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons this was a terrible idea, why she wasn't ready, why James Harrison would realize his mistake the moment she actually tried to create a business plan. But Sophie's words echoed in her head. Don't let fear win. Wasn't that exactly what Kayla had been doing for the last 2 years? Choosing safety over dreams, avoiding risk, because risk meant the possibility of failure. And Kayla had already failed once. She didn't think she could survive failing again. "What if I screw it up?" Kayla asked quietly. "Then you screw it up, and you'll still be exactly where you are now, working at Billionaire, living your life. But Kayla, what if you don't screw it up? What if this is your chance to actually do the thing you've always wanted to do?" Sophie squeezed her hands. "Call him. At least take the meeting. You owe yourself that much." Kayla left the coffee shop with Sophie's words rattling around her brain. She walked aimlessly through Brooklyn, watching families with strollers, couples holding hands, people living their lives with apparent confidence that they were heading in the right direction. Kayla had never felt that confidence. She'd always been waiting for someone to tell her it was okay to want things, to try things, to fail and try again. Maybe James Harrison, in his strange, lonely way, had told her exactly that. She pulled out her phone before she could overthink it, dialed the number on his business card. It rang 3 times, and Kayla's courage nearly failed. She was about to hang up when a familiar voice answered. "This is James. It's Kayla Wood, from Billionaire." The words came out rushed, awkward. "You said to call if I wanted to talk about the investment." Silence on the other end. Then, "Kayla, I wasn't sure I'd hear from you. I wasn't sure I'd call," Kayla admitted. "This is insane. You know this is insane, right?" "Completely insane," James agreed, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Are you free tomorrow afternoon? I'd like to meet and discuss next steps. No pressure, no commitments. Just a conversation." Kayla's heart hammered. This was it. The moment where she either stepped forward or stepped back into the safe, suffocating life she'd built out of fear. "Yes, I'm free." "Good. Meet me at Harrison Ventures at 2. I'll text you the address." He paused. "Kayla, thank you for calling. I know it took courage." "Thank you for picking up," Kayla managed. "I know it took patience to wait." James laughed, a real laugh this time, warm and surprised. "See you tomorrow." The line went dead. Kayla stood on a random Brooklyn corner, phone in hand, feeling like she'd just jumped off a cliff and wasn't sure if she'd packed a parachute. Around her, the city hummed with life and possibility, and 1,000 different futures waiting to be chosen. Kayla chose to be terrified and excited in equal measure. That night, she dug out her old notebooks, the ones she'd shoved in a closet after dropping out of culinary school. Pages and pages of menu concepts, ingredient combinations, plating ideas, sketches of what woods might look like: warm wood, soft lighting, a kitchen visible from the dining room so people could watch their food being prepared. She'd imagined every detail 100 times, and then she'd buried it all because imagination hurt less when you pretended you'd stopped caring. Now Kayla spread the notebooks across her floor and started organizing. Appetizers, mains, desserts, seasonal variations. She wrote until her hand cramped, fueled by cheap wine and the reckless hope that maybe, just maybe, this could actually happen. The next morning, Kayla woke up surrounded by papers and regret. What was she doing? James Harrison was a businessman, not a fairy godmother. He wasn't going to just hand her money and let her fumble her way to success. He'd expect a real plan, real numbers, real evidence that she could actually run a restaurant. And Kayla had no idea where to start. She called in sick to Lumiere, something she'd never done, and spent the morning researching. Business plan templates, restaurant startup costs, licensing requirements. The numbers were staggering. Even a small restaurant required hundreds of thousands in capital. Equipment, rent, permits, staff, insurance, inventory. Kayla's savings wouldn't even cover the deposit on a commercial space. This was impossible. James had offered a fantasy, and Kayla had been stupid enough to believe in it. At 1:30, she almost texted him to cancel. Her thumb hovered over her phone, the message half-typed. "I can't do this. I'm sorry for wasting your time." But then she remembered his voice on the phone, the way he'd said, "I know it took courage." He'd understood. He'd been scared too once. Maybe he still was. Kayla deleted the text and got dressed. Harrison Ventures occupied the 15th floor of a sleek building in Midtown. The lobby was all glass and steel, aggressively modern, the kind of place where Kayla felt immediately out of place in her thrift store blazer and Target flats. The receptionist, a woman with perfect makeup and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, directed Kayla to a conference room with a view that stretched across Manhattan. James was already there, standing at the window with his hands in his pockets. He'd traded his restaurant suit for jeans and a gray sweater. More casual, but somehow even more intimidating. He looked like he belonged in this world of glass and steel and impossible views. Kayla felt like an imposter. "Kayla." He turned as she entered, and his expression softened into something almost like relief. "You came. You didn't think I would?" "I wasn't sure. Most people would have decided I was crazy and moved on with their lives." He gestured to the table, where a laptop sat open next to 2 cups of coffee. "I got you a cappuccino, extra foam. I remembered from the restaurant." The small gesture, the attention to detail, made Kayla's throat tight. "Thank you." They sat across from each other, and James slid a folder across the table. "I had my team put together some preliminary research. Neighborhood analysis for potential restaurant locations, demographic data, competitive landscape. I want you to take this home and read through it. But first, I need to understand your vision. Not the business side, just the dream. What does Woods look like in your head?" Kayla took a breath. "It's small, maybe 40 seats. Open kitchen so people can see the cooking process, smell the garlic hitting hot oil, watch the flames. The menu changes seasonally, whatever's fresh and local. Comfort food, but elevated. Think braised short ribs with creamy polenta, or roasted chicken with brown butter carrots. Nothing that requires tweezers to plate. Nothing pretentious. Just food that makes people feel taken care of. She paused, feeling heat in her cheeks. And every Sunday, we do family dinners. Long communal tables. Fixed menu, one price. Anyone can come, even if they can't afford it. We cover the cost with Friday and Saturday premium service. James was quiet, his gray-blue eyes fixed on her face. Why? Why what? Why the family dinners? That's not a profit center. Most investors would tell you to cut it. Kayla met his gaze. Because food is about more than profit. It's about connection. About sitting around a table with strangers and realizing you're all just people trying to get through the week. My mom used to do Sunday dinners when I was a kid, before my dad left and everything fell apart. She'd invite neighbors, co-workers, random people from church. Our house would smell like roasting meat and fresh bread, and for a few hours, everything felt okay. I want to give people that feeling. Okay, James said simply. Then we make sure the business model supports it. Kayla blinked. Just like that? You're not going to tell me it's sentimental and impractical? It's both those things, James agreed. It's also what will make Woods different from every other neighborhood restaurant in New York. People don't just want food, Kayla. They want meaning. You're offering both. He opened his laptop. Here's what I'm thinking. We start small. Pop-up residencies at existing venues. Test menu concepts. Build a following. Use that to gather data. Refine the vision. Prove demand. Then we look for a permanent location. Timeline: 12 months from concept to grand opening. Budget: $750,000 for the full build-out and first-year operating costs. $750,000. Kayla felt dizzy. That's a lot of money to risk on someone with no track record. I'm not risking it on someone with no track record. I'm investing it in someone with vision, talent, and the courage to walk into my office despite being terrified. James leaned forward. Kayla, I've funded 15 businesses in the last 3 years. 12 of them are profitable. 2 broke even. 1 failed spectacularly because the founder didn't actually care about the work, just about being able to say he'd started something. You're not that person. You care too much to fail. What if caring isn't enough? Then we'll fail together, and I'll lose $750,000, which is annoying, but not devastating. James smiled. But I don't think we're going to fail. I think you're going to build something extraordinary, and I'm going to get to say, I knew you when. Kayla's eyes stung. Nobody had ever talked about her like this, like she was someone worth betting on. Why are you doing this? Really? And don't tell me it's just a business investment. You don't need my 15% equity. James was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed his laptop and met her eyes. Because that night at Lumiere, you reminded me why I started doing this work in the first place. I didn't build my company to make money. I built it because I wanted to solve problems, to create things that mattered. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. I got caught up in the metrics, the exits, the next deal. You reminded me that the point isn't success, it's meaning. And I want to help you build something meaningful, because maybe if I do, I'll remember how to find meaning in my own life. The honesty in his voice cracked something open in Kayla's chest. You're not what I expected. Neither are you, James said. I expected a server who would thank me politely and never call. Instead, I got someone brave enough to tell me uncomfortable truths, and then brave enough to walk through the door, even though it scared her. So what do you say, Kayla Wood? Are you ready to build something together? Kayla looked at the folder on the table, at the laptop with its financial projections, at James Harrison with his tired eyes and unexpected faith in her. She thought about Sophie saying, "Don't let fear win." She thought about her mother's Sunday dinners, about the dream she'd buried in a closet, about the person she wanted to become. "I'm ready," Kayla said. "Let's build Woods." James's smile was like sunrise, bright and genuine, and worth every moment of terror that had led Kayla to this room. He extended his hand across the table. "Partners?" Kayla shook his hand, his grip warm and steady. "Partners." The next 6 months were a whirlwind. Kayla quit her job at Lumiere despite Marco's protests, burned through her savings on recipe testing and ingredient sourcing, and threw herself into building Woods with an intensity that scared her. James was there every step of the way, not as a distant investor, but as an active partner. He connected Kayla with commercial real estate agents, introduced her to other restaurateurs in his portfolio, sat through dozens of menu tastings, and gave brutally honest feedback. "This risotto is good," James said during one testing session in Kayla's cramped apartment kitchen. "But it's not Woods. It's technically perfect, which makes it boring. Where's the twist? Where's the thing that makes me think about this dish when I'm trying to fall asleep at night?" Kayla wanted to throw the wooden spoon at him. Instead, she thought about what he'd said. Woods wasn't about perfection. It was about heart. She remade the risotto with brown butter and crispy sage, added a whisper of lemon zest, and toasted pine nuts. When James tasted it, his eyes closed. "That's Woods," he said. "That's the one." They started with a pop-up residency at a wine bar in the West Village, 4 nights a week, limited seating, prix-fixe menu. Kayla cooked in a kitchen the size of a closet with 1 assistant and a prayer. The first night, 6 people came. The second night, 15. By the 4th week, they were sold out a month in advance, and food bloggers were calling Woods' pop-up the best-kept secret in Manhattan. James came to every service, sitting at the bar with a glass of wine, watching Kayla work. He never interfered. Never offered unsolicited advice, just observed with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. Afterward, they'd debrief over coffee at an all-night diner. Kayla exhausted and exhilarated, James scribbling notes about what worked and what didn't. "You need to stop apologizing to customers," James said one night. "Every time you bring out a dish, you say, 'I hope this is okay.' It undercuts your authority. You're the chef. You're not hoping anything. You're delivering an experience you've crafted. Own it." "I'm not used to being in charge," Kayla admitted. "At Lumiere, I was just the person bringing other people's creations to the table. You're not at Lumiere anymore. You're Kayla Wood, and people are paying to eat your food because it's yours. Start believing that." It was harsh, but not unkind. The kind of feedback that pushed Kayla to be better without crushing her. She stopped apologizing. She started making eye contact when she presented dishes, explaining her choices with confidence instead of uncertainty. The customers responded, leaning in, asking questions, treating Kayla like the artist she was becoming. On a Wednesday in March, James called Kayla to his office. She showed up straight from a morning at the farmer's market, her hands still smelling like fresh thyme and her jeans dusted with flour. The receptionist tried to hide a smile as Kayla tracked dirt across the pristine lobby. James was in the conference room again, but this time he wasn't alone. A woman in her 50s sat at the table, elegant and sharp-eyed, with silver hair and an expression that suggested she suffered no fools. "Kayla, this is Patricia Rowland. She owns the building on 10th Avenue that we've been watching." Kayla's heart stopped. The building on 10th Avenue was perfect. Corner location, big windows, the bones of an old pharmacy that could be converted into exactly the kind of intimate dining space Kayla had dreamed about. It was also wildly expensive, and Kayla had convinced herself it was out of reach. "Ms. Wood," Patricia extended a hand. "James has told me a great deal about your vision. I'd like to hear it from you directly. Why should I lease my property to an unproven chef with no restaurant experience?" Kayla glanced at James. He gave her the smallest nod, an encouragement. She took a breath. Because Woods isn't just another restaurant. It's a commitment to the neighborhood, to creating a space where people feel welcome, regardless of their budget or background. I'm not trying to get a Michelin star or impress critics. I'm trying to feed people food that matters, in a space that feels like home. And Ms. Rowland, your building deserves to be more than just another overpriced condo conversion. It deserves to be part of the community. Patricia studied Kayla for a long moment. Then she smiled. "You'll have the space. 5-year lease, with an option to renew. James will send over the terms." Kayla's legs nearly gave out. "Thank you. I promise you won't regret this." "I'm sure I won't. James doesn't make bad investments." Patricia stood, gathering her bag. "Good luck, Ms. Wood. I'll expect an invitation to your opening." After Patricia left, Kayla turned to James, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. "How did you do that?" "I didn't do anything except introduce you to someone who could help. You did the rest." James looked pleased, more relaxed than Kayla had seen him since that first night at Lumiere. "We have our location. Now the real work begins." And the real work was grueling. Permit applications, construction delays, equipment breakdowns, staffing nightmares. Kayla worked 18-hour days, sketching floor plans at 2 in the morning, negotiating with contractors who thought they could take advantage of a young female chef, learning to read contracts and P&L statements and health inspection codes. She made mistakes constantly, costly ones, and learned from each failure. James was there for all of it, offering advice when Kayla asked, but mostly just showing up. He'd appear at the construction site with coffee, or send texts checking in when Kayla hadn't responded in days. Once, when Kayla had a complete meltdown over a supplier canceling 3 weeks before the scheduled opening, James drove her to the coast and made her walk on the beach until she could breathe again. "I can't do this," Kayla had said, sitting on the sand with her head in her hands. "I'm not ready. I'm going to fail, and I'm going to lose your money, and everyone who believed in me is going to realize I was never good enough." James sat beside her, not touching, but close enough that Kayla could feel his presence. "You're right. You're not ready. Nobody's ever ready. You think I was ready when I launched my first app? I was terrified. I threw up before every investor pitch. And I failed, Kayla. 3 times. 3 complete, expensive failures before App Nexus took off. And you know what I learned? Failure doesn't mean you're not good enough. It means you're trying something hard enough to be worth failing at." Kayla looked at him, at the expensive clothes and confident posture that hid the person underneath. "Do you still get scared?" "Every single day," James admitted. "But I've learned that fear and excitement feel almost identical. The trick is deciding which one you want to listen to." Kayla chose excitement. She went back to the city, reworked her supplier contracts, and kept building. Woods opened on a Friday in May, exactly 12 months after that strange night at Lumiere. The dining room was packed, 40 seats filled with friends, family, investors, food writers, and neighborhood residents who'd watched the transformation from abandoned pharmacy to warm, glowing restaurant. Kayla's mother sat at a corner table, tears streaming down her face, holding Sophie's hand. Marco from Lumiere had sent a massive floral arrangement with a card that read, Knew you were special. Prove me right. Kayla stood in the open kitchen, her chef's whites crisp and her hand steady, and cooked the most important meal of her life: pan-seared scallops with brown butter and capers, braised short ribs over creamy polenta, roasted chicken with herbs and carrots that tasted like childhood and safety. Each plate left the kitchen perfect, and Kayla felt, for the first time in her life, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. James sat at the bar, his usual spot, watching Kayla with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe, or satisfaction, or something else. Something softer that made Kayla's chest feel too full. At the end of service, after the last guest had left and the staff was cleaning up, James approached the kitchen. "Walk with me." They stepped outside into the May night, the air soft and full of city sounds. Kayla's feet ached, her back hurt, and she'd never been happier. "You did it," James said. "Woods is real." "We did it," Kayla corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You could have. It would have taken longer, and the path would have been different, but you would have found a way. You're too stubborn to give up." James smiled. "I'm proud of you, Kayla." The words settled around Kayla like a blanket, warm and unexpected. "Thank you. For everything. For that insane night at Lumiere. For believing in me. For not giving up when I was ready to." "Thank you for calling me back," James said quietly, "for giving me a reason to care about something again." They stood in the soft glow of Wood's front windows, two people who'd met by accident and built something on purpose. Kayla thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, scared and stuck, and convinced she'd already missed her chance. She thought about James, buying out a restaurant just to feel less alone. They'd both been lost, in different ways, and somehow they'd found each other at exactly the right moment. "What happens now?" Kayla asked. "We've launched. The restaurant's open. What's next?" James looked at her, and Kayla saw something shift in his expression, the careful investor mask slipping to reveal the person underneath. "Honestly, I have no idea. For the first time in years, I don't have a 5-year plan. I'm just here, in this moment, with you. And that's enough." Kayla smiled. "That sounds perfect." The first year of Woods was a beautiful disaster. Kayla had expected challenges, but she hadn't anticipated the sheer relentlessness of running a restaurant. Equipment broke at the worst possible moments. Staff called in sick during their busiest services. Food critics came unannounced and wrote reviews that ranged from glowing to devastating. Kayla learned to read Yelp reviews without spiraling, learned to handle customer complaints with grace, learned that being a chef wasn't just about cooking, but about managing personalities and egos and 1,000 tiny fires that threatened to consume everything she'd built. James was there through all of it, but their relationship had shifted into something Kayla couldn't quite define. He was her business partner, yes, but also her friend, her advisor, the person she called at 2 in the morning when the walk-in freezer died, and she was having a panic attack about losing thousands of dollars in inventory. He'd talked her down, called a 24-hour repair service, and shown up at the restaurant in jeans and a t-shirt to help Kayla transfer everything to borrowed cooler space. "You don't have to do this," Kayla had said, watching him haul containers of stock. "This isn't what investors do." "Maybe I'm a terrible investor," James replied, "or maybe I'm exactly where I want to be." The comment had hung between them, loaded with something unspoken. Kayla had ignored it, too exhausted and stressed to examine what James meant. But the moment stayed with her, replaying late at night when she couldn't sleep. They fell into a routine. James came to Woods 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to sit at the bar and work on his laptop while Kayla cooked. He introduced her to other entrepreneurs in his network, made connections that led to catering opportunities and press features. When Woods was named one of New York Magazine's best new restaurants, James framed the article and hung it in Kayla's office. "You're going to be insufferable now," he'd teased. "I'm allowed to be insufferable. I earned it." Kayla had grinned, feeling lighter than she had in months. But success brought its own pressures. As Wood's reputation grew, so did the expectations. Customers wanted reservations weeks in advance. Food writers compared Kayla's cooking to established chefs with decades more experience. Kayla felt the weight of everyone's belief in her, including James's, and some nights it was crushing. On a Tuesday in October, Kayla was prepping for dinner service when her phone rang. Her mother. Kayla almost didn't answer, but guilt made her pick up. "Kayla, honey, I'm so glad I caught you." Her mother's voice was tight with something Kayla couldn't identify. "I need to tell you something, and I need you not to panic." Kayla's hands went cold. "What's wrong?" "I'm okay, but I had a small health scare. The doctors found something during my routine checkup. It's probably nothing, but they want to do more tests, and I just thought you should know." The world tilted. Kayla's mother was only 54, healthy as far as Kayla knew, the kind of woman who power walked every morning and grew her own vegetables. "What kind of something?" "A mass in my lung." "Kayla, I don't want you to worry. The doctors are very optimistic, but I wanted you to hear it from me, not from your brother." Kayla's brother was a cardiologist in Boston, responsible and serious, and everything Kayla wasn't. Of course he already knew. Of course he'd been the one their mother called first. "When are the tests?" "Next week. Kayla, I don't want this to disrupt your life. You have the restaurant. You're finally doing something important." "You're important," Kayla said, her voice breaking. "Mom, you're the most important. I'll be there for the tests. I'll take time off." "You can't just take time off. You're the chef." "I'll figure it out." Kayla was already mentally rearranging the kitchen schedule, planning what she could prep in advance. "Mom, I'm coming. End of discussion." After she hung up, Kayla stood in her quiet kitchen, the familiar space suddenly feeling foreign. Her hands shook. Her mother might be sick, really sick, and Kayla had been so consumed with the restaurant that she'd barely spoken to her in months, too busy for weekly calls, canceling Sunday visits because of work. She called James without thinking. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Kayla, what's wrong?" How did he always know? Kayla told him about her mother, the words tumbling out in a rush. James listened without interrupting, and when Kayla finally fell silent, he said, "I'll cover your shifts, whatever you need." "James, you can't cook." "Then I'll find someone who can. Kayla, family comes first. Always. Woods will survive a week without you." His voice gentled. "Your mother needs you. Go be with her." Kayla closed her eyes. "Thank you." "Call me when you know more," James said. "And Kayla, she's going to be okay. But even if she's not, you're going to get through this. I promise." Kayla flew to Boston the next day, leaving Woods in the capable hands of her sous chef and a series of detailed instructions that probably bordered on obsessive. Her mother met her at the door of the small house where Kayla had grown up, looking thinner than Kayla remembered, but smiling. "You didn't have to come," her mother said, pulling Kayla into a hug. "Yes, I did." Kayla held on tight, breathing in her mother's familiar scent of lavender and bread. "You've been there for every disaster in my life. I'm here for this." The next week was a blur of doctor's appointments and waiting rooms and medical jargon, that Kayla struggled to understand. Her brother flew in from his practice, all efficiency and clinical detachment, and Kayla wanted to shake him. This was their mother, not a case study. But she bit her tongue and let him ask the practical questions, while Kayla held their mother's hand. The biopsy results came back on a Thursday. Benign, not cancer. A scare, nothing more. Kayla's mother cried with relief, and Kayla joined her, all the fear she'd been holding back pouring out in messy, grateful sobs. "You can go back to your restaurant now," her mother said that evening over dinner. "Stop worrying about me." "I'm always going to worry about you," Kayla replied. "And Mom, I'm sorry I've been so absent. The restaurant isn't more important than you." Her mother reached across the table and squeezed Kayla's hand. "The restaurant is your dream. I want you to chase it. I'm proud of you, honey. So proud. But promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll let yourself be happy. Not just successful, but happy. That means taking time for people you love, for relationships, for life outside that kitchen." Her mother's eyes were knowing, "Including that investor of yours who calls every day to check on you." Kayla's cheeks warmed. "James is a friend. Kayla, I may be old, but I'm not blind. That man cares about you. And unless I'm very wrong, you care about him too." Kayla wanted to deny it, but what was the point? Her mother had always been able to see through her defenses. "It's complicated. He's my business partner. Getting involved would be messy. Life is messy, sweetheart. That's what makes it worth living." Kayla returned to New York with her mother's words echoing in her head. Woods had survived her absence beautifully, which was both reassuring and slightly bruising to Kayla's ego. The kitchen staff had handled everything, and customers had been understanding about the limited menu. James had come in every night, not to cook, but to manage the front of house, charming guests and ensuring service ran smoothly. "You didn't have to do that," Kayla said, when they met for coffee the day after her return. "I wanted to," James replied simply. "How's your mother?" "Good. Healthy. It was a scare, but she's okay." Kayla stirred sugar into her cappuccino. "James, why do you do all this? And don't tell me it's just because you're an investor. You go beyond what any investor would do." James was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his coffee and met Kayla's eyes. "Because somewhere between that first night at Lumiere and today, you became the most important person in my life. And I don't know when it happened or how, but it did. I'm not just invested in your restaurant, Kayla. I'm invested in you, in your happiness, your success, your life." Kayla's heart stuttered. "James, I know it's complicated. I know we're business partners, and there are power dynamics, and 100 reasons why this is a terrible idea. But I'm tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel. I'm tired of being careful and strategic about something that's never been careful or strategic." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm in love with you, Kayla. I think I have been since you told me I was lonely and exhausted and had no idea how to fix it. And I don't expect you to feel the same way, but I needed you to know." Kayla's breath caught. She looked at their joined hands, at James's face with its careful hope and fear of rejection, and realized her mother was right. Life was messy, but messy could also be beautiful. "I'm in love with you too," Kayla said quietly. "And I have no idea how to make this work without ruining everything we've built. But I want to try." James's smile was like sunrise, bright and impossible. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." He leaned across the small table and kissed her, soft and certain, and Kayla felt everything click into place. The restaurant, the partnership, the friendship that had become something more. It all made sense suddenly. They'd both been alone, both been scared, both been convinced that success meant sacrifice. But maybe they'd been wrong. Maybe success meant finding someone who made you want to be braver, better, more fully yourself. When they broke apart, Kayla was smiling. "This is going to be complicated." "Good," James said. "I've always liked a challenge." Woods flourished over the next year, but more importantly, so did Kayla. She and James navigated their relationship carefully, keeping professional boundaries at work while building a life together outside the restaurant. They took weekends off, something Kayla had never allowed herself before. They traveled to farmers markets and food festivals, cooked together in Kayla's apartment, went to museums and movies, and did all the normal things Kayla had thought she didn't have time for. James loosened up, trading his corporate armor for something more human. He smiled more, laughed more, stopped working 18-hour days. He took Kayla to Montana to meet his father, a stiff, uncomfortable visit that ended with James finally telling his father that he was proud of the life he'd built, even if it wasn't the life Richard Harrison had wanted for him. Kayla introduced James to her mother, who took one look at them together and said, "Finally, I was beginning to think you'd both die alone and stubborn." They didn't die alone. They thrived. Woods won awards, got written up in national magazines, became the kind of restaurant where people proposed and celebrated anniversaries, and brought out-of-town guests to experience something authentically New York. Kayla hired more staff, promoted her sous chef, and finally learned to delegate. And every Sunday, they held family dinners, exactly as Kayla had envisioned. Long communal tables filled with strangers who became friends over braised meats and fresh bread, and the kind of food that reminded people why gathering around a table mattered. James came to everyone, no longer sitting at the bar, but at the table with everyone else, talking and laughing and belonging in a way he never had before. Kayla crashed into his carefully controlled life. 2 years after that first night at Lumiere, James showed up at Woods after closing with a bottle of champagne and a small velvet box. Kayla knew what was in it before he opened it, and her answer was yes before he even asked the question. They got married at Woods, of course, surrounded by friends and family and the food that had brought them together. Kayla wore a simple white dress and cooked her own wedding dinner, because that's who she was. James wore a suit and cried during the vows, because he'd finally learned it was okay to feel things fully. "Thank you," Kayla said during their first dance, swaying in the dining room that had once been an abandoned pharmacy and was now the center of her world. "For what?" James asked. "For buying out that restaurant, for being lonely enough to sit with a server and tell the truth, for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself." James kissed her forehead. "Thank you for refusing to leave your table that night." Kayla laughed, confused. "I wasn't at a table. You were the one eating alone." "You were at the table in my head," James said. "The one where I'd convinced myself I was fine being isolated and successful and empty. You refused to let me stay there. You made me leave that table and join the rest of the world. So thank you, Kayla Wood Harrison, for being stubborn and brave and exactly what I needed." Kayla kissed him then, surrounded by the people they loved and the life they'd built and the food that had been, in the end, about so much more than just eating. It had been about connection, about risk, about choosing to be vulnerable enough to let someone in.